Stop free-ranging your chickens. That sentence is going to make some people close this video immediately, and I understand why. Every homesteading channel on the internet tells you that free-ranging is the natural approach, the healthy approach, the way real small-scale farmers manage their flocks. It has become so embedded in backyard chicken culture that questioning it feels like questioning the entire philosophy of keeping chickens in the first place. But if you are on small acreage, anything under 2 acres, free-ranging is quietly doing damage you are probably not attributing to the correct cause. It is destroying the sections of your garden you worked hardest to establish. It is compacting and burning soil in the areas your chickens return to every single day. It is costing you hundreds of dollars annually in replacement plants, destroyed mulch, and concentrated manure damage that you are absorbing as a normal cost of chicken keeping, rather than recognizing as a direct consequence of an approach that does not work on small properties the way it works on large ones. And here is the part that should genuinely bother you. Your chickens are probably not even foraging efficiently. They are wandering. They are returning to the same 5 spots on your property every single day because those spots are familiar and comfortable, not because those spots are the most productive foraging areas available to them. You are dealing with all of the destruction and all of the management demands of free-ranging and still buying nearly as much commercial feed as you would if the birds never left the coop. The chaos is real. The savings are not. There is a better system. One that delivers everything free-ranging promises, including fresh forage, natural insect hunting, meaningful physical and behavioral enrichment, but does it in a way that actively builds your soil instead of destroying it, protects your garden instead of raiding it, and genuinely reduces your feed bill by up to 80%, rather than the 10 to 15% that random free-ranging actually produces in practice on a small property. By the end of this, you are going to know exactly what that system looks like, how to set it up on your specific property, and why it works so much better than the approach you were told was the right one from the beginning. Here's what actually happens on a small property when chickens free range without management. The birds do not distribute themselves evenly across the available space, the way a large acreage rotational grazing model assumes. They concentrate heavily in 3 or 4 preferred locations. The area immediately adjacent to the coop receives the most traffic by a significant margin because it requires the least effort from the birds and because it is where the social hierarchy is most established. Those concentration points get hammered. Bare dirt patches appear within weeks where grass and ground cover used to grow. Soil in those areas becomes compacted and nitrogen burned from the concentrated manure, creating conditions where nothing will grow even after the birds are moved. Every garden bed within roaming distance becomes vulnerable to seedling destruction, molt scratching, and root disturbance on a timeline that most beginners do not connect to their chicken management until after the 3rd or 4th replanting of the same bed. The average small acreage chicken keeper spends over $500 annually on commercial feed for a modest flock. That number keeps rising, with feed prices that have not shown any consistent downward movement in years. Meanwhile, the free-ranging that was supposed to offset that cost is realistically replacing 10 to 20% of the diet in most small property situations, because the foraging pressure across a limited space does not sustain the insect and plant populations that meaningful dietary supplementation requires. You are paying nearly full feed costs and absorbing the destruction simultaneously. The economic case for free-ranging on small acreage does not hold up when the numbers are examined honestly. The deeper problem is structural rather than just managerial. Your garden, your chickens, your compost, and whatever food-producing perennials you have on the property are sitting on the same piece of land but operating as completely separate systems with no meaningful connection between them. Garden waste goes to a compost pile that sits separately from the chicken operation. Chicken manure falls in the wrong places and creates problems rather than fertility where it would be useful. The compost never makes it back to the beds on a reliable schedule, and most small acreage keepers are not growing any dedicated feed crops at all, which means every calorie the chickens consume beyond what random foraging provides comes from a purchased bag. Nothing is feeding the next thing. And that disconnection is the actual cause of the dependency on the feed store, the fertilizer aisle, and the cycle of continuous expense that never builds toward anything self-sustaining, regardless of how many seasons you run it. The layout is the problem, not the chickens, not the land, not your effort or commitment or knowledge about chicken keeping in general. The layout is wrong, and until that is fixed, free-ranging is just a description of chickens wandering a property while you pay for everything they need. This is not a new problem, and the solution is not a new idea. Managed chicken movement as an intentional practice has documented roots going back centuries, and the farmers who developed it were not doing so because they read about regenerative agriculture on the internet. They were doing it because they were feeding families on small plots of land with zero access to commercial feed. And the managed movement system was what worked when nothing else did. Lady Eve Balfour, one of the pioneering figures of organic farming in the 1940s, developed a specific rotation pen system designed precisely to allow chickens to feed themselves while simultaneously regenerating the land they occupied. 2 grazing pens planted with clover and ryegrass, 1 scratching pen filled with compost material, chickens rotated between all 3 on a deliberate schedule. The documented result was chickens that fed themselves almost entirely from what the system produced, soil that built measurable organic matter and biological activity with every rotation cycle, and an operation that ran on near-zero external inputs once established. Before her work was published, traditional smallholders across Europe had been running chicken tractors for generations, moving lightweight mobile enclosures across garden beds to clear weeds, eliminate overwintering pest populations, and deposit fertility in preparation for the next planting. No chemicals, no purchased fertilizer, no feed store visits. Chickens functioning as the biological engine of an integrated small property system. These were not hobby operations. These were food production systems that families depended on entirely, operating on properties smaller than what most people watching this video currently own. They worked because they were built around how chickens actually behave when their movement is managed, rather than around the convenience of letting birds wander and purchasing whatever nutrition the wandering does not provide. The first system that replaces free-ranging on a small property is the chicken tractor method, and it is the mechanical foundation that every other managed movement approach builds on. A chicken tractor is a lightweight, mobile enclosure, no floor, moved across your garden beds on a schedule that matches the production cycle of whatever cover crop is planted in each bed ahead of the tractor's arrival. The sequence runs like this. You plant a fast-growing cover crop in each garden bed after harvest: rye, clover, buckwheat, or any combination that establishes quickly in your climate. You allow that cover crop 3 to 4 weeks to develop meaningful biomass. Then, you move the tractor onto the bed. Your chickens spend 2 to 3 weeks in that location, eating the greens down to ground level, scratching through the top few inches of soil hunting insects, grubs, and weed seeds, and depositing manure directly onto the bed surface at a rate and distribution that benefits the soil rather than burning it. When you move the tractor to the next bed, the first bed is cleared of weeds, inoculated with fertility, and biologically activated in ways that a bag of granular fertilizer applied to the same soil never achieves. You plant your next crop directly into that prepared surface. The rotation cycles continuously through your available beds. By the time the tractor completes the circuit and returns to the first bed, that bed has recovered, and the cover crop you seeded immediately after moving the tractor off it has established and is ready to receive the birds again. The system self-renews on a footprint that fits comfortably on a 1/4 acre or less. The chickens are doing exactly what chickens were designed to do biologically, but in a location and on a timeline that produces specific beneficial outcomes, rather than random damage. The second managed movement system addresses something the tractor method does not fully solve on its own, which is the need for year-round, fresh forage access that does not require continuous replanting labor from you. The Balfour rotation pen system fills that gap directly. 3 pens established as permanent infrastructure on your property. 2 grazing pens seeded with a perennial forage mix that includes white clover, red clover, ryegrass, plantain, dandelion, and chickweed in proportions suited to your climate zone. 1 scratching pen filled with a deep layer of compost material, wood chips, and organic matter that the birds work through continuously. The chickens move between these pens on a 2 to 3 week rotation schedule that prevents any single pen from being overgrazed while allowing the resting pens to regenerate fully between occupancies. During the active growing season, this system replaces 60 to 70% of commercial feed consumption in a well-managed flock. The documented savings across a modest flock of 6 to 8 hens running a properly managed Balfour rotation run $350 to $400 annually in reduced feed costs. The soil within the rotation pens builds measurable organic matter content with every cycle because the birds are depositing fertility at rates the resting vegetation can absorb and convert into the next flush of growth. The system produces more forage in its second season than its first, and more in its third than its second, because the soil biology supporting the perennial forage mix strengthens with every rotation cycle, rather than depleting the way a static pen or a free-ranged property does. The placement of these pens relative to your existing garden beds and your daily movement pattern through the property is the detail most people get wrong when they try to implement this system from a written description alone. The grazing pens need to connect to the garden bed rotation in a way that makes the transition of birds between zones a 5-minute task rather than a logistical project. The scratching pen needs to sit adjacent to wherever your garden waste and kitchen scraps arrive so that compost feeding the pen is part of the same daily routine as bringing scraps from the kitchen, rather than a separate trip to a separate location. That spatial logic is what makes the system run without adding management burden, rather than replacing one form of effort with another. The third system is seasonal and requires almost nothing from you beyond the decision to open a gate at the right time of year. Orchard access during the dormant season. If you have even 2 or 3 fruit trees on your property, you have a free winter feeding station that most chicken keepers leave completely unused. From November through February in most climate zones, your orchard floor is covered with fallen fruit in various stages of decomposition, overwintering insect populations sheltering in leaf litter and soil, and decomposing organic matter that represents a complete nutritional supplement for a small flock. Your chickens hunt through all of it, depositing fertility around your tree root zones in the process. The trees benefit from the pest pressure reduction and the fertility input simultaneously. The chickens access nutrition that would otherwise be contributing to overwintering pest pressure in your orchard. Both systems improve through an exchange that costs you nothing. The critical management detail is keeping the birds out during the growing season, from spring bud break through harvest. Chickens in an active orchard during fruit development will damage low-hanging developing fruit, disturb shallow root zones during aggressive scratching, and consume beneficial insects alongside pest species. Winter only, with clean boundaries on both ends of the access window, is the approach that captures the benefit without creating new problems. That boundary management is simple in practice. It is a gate that opens in November and closes in March. The fourth element of this system is where the transformation from a conventional, small flock to a genuinely self-sustaining food production unit actually occurs. And it is the piece that most beginning chicken keepers never implement, because nobody frames it as essential infrastructure rather than optional enhancement. Perennial feed crops planted as permanent borders and edges throughout the property. Part 2 covers exactly which crops, exactly where to place them, how the complete system connects every element into a single, self-feeding loop, and the specific mistakes that wreck this approach before it ever reaches its productive potential. 3 perennial crops transform the edges and borders of a small property from wasted space into a year-round feed system that requires no replanting, no purchased fertility, and no management beyond the harvesting that becomes part of your daily morning routine once the plants are established. Comfrey first. Planted along every fence line, garden border, and unused edge on your property. A single established comfrey plant produces 4 to 5 cuttings per season at 2 to 5 pounds of biomass per cut. Chickens eat fresh comfrey leaves eagerly, and the protein content of the leaf material rivals what commercial feed delivers at a cost that, after the initial planting, rounds to zero permanently. Comfrey roots go deep enough to access mineral layers that topsoil crops cannot reach, which means the leaves carry a micronutrient profile that purchased feed does not replicate, regardless of how the label reads. Cut it, drop it in the run or the scratching pen, and walk away. The plant regrows in 3 to 4 weeks without any intervention from you. Tree collards are the second perennial that solves the specific problem comfrey does not fully address, which is winter production. Tree collards are cold-tolerant perennial greens that continue producing harvestable leaf material through temperatures that end the productivity of almost every other green crop on a small property. Plant them close to the coop so that harvesting a daily handful of leaves is a 10-second task rather than a separate trip across the property. Chickens consume fresh tree collard leaves immediately, and the nutritional contribution through the winter months, when the grazing pens have slowed and the orchard access window has closed, bridges the gap that most small acreage keepers fill with an additional bag of commercial feed every month from October through March. Jerusalem artichoke is the third perennial, and the one that provides what neither comfrey nor tree collards do, which is a concentrated carbohydrate source that stores underground through winter without any preservation effort from you. Plant it once in zones 3 through 9, and it returns every year, expanding its footprint without any replanting. Harvest tubers as needed through the winter months and feed them directly. Chop the dried stalks and push them through the run wire as roughage and behavioral enrichment. A single established patch of Jerusalem artichoke provides carbohydrate supplementation through the months when outdoor foraging produces nothing, and purchased feed would otherwise cover the entire dietary requirement. Together, these 3 crops cover protein, micronutrients, winter greens, and carbohydrate storage from permanent plantings that cost almost nothing after establishment and produce more reliably every season as their root systems develop. Place all 3 along paths you already walk during morning chores. Convenience is the variable that determines whether perennial feed crops actually get harvested daily or become plants you tend occasionally while still buying feed every month. The closed loop that connects all of these systems is the actual destination. Garden beds grow cover crops that the chicken tractor converts into cleared, fertilized planting surfaces. The Balfour rotation pens produce year-round fresh forage while building soil biology in the pen areas. The orchard provides winter supplementation at no cost. Perennial borders supply protein, greens, and carbohydrates across every season. The scratching pen processes kitchen and garden waste into finished fertility while simultaneously feeding the flock. Nothing leaves the property as waste. Every output becomes an input for the next system in the sequence. Your feed bill on a small property running this complete managed movement system drops from $45 to $60 per month to under $10. Your garden produces more because the fertility cycling through the chicken systems is returning to the beds on a schedule and at a concentration that purchased fertilizer does not match. Your soil improves measurably every season instead of degrading under concentrated free-range pressure. And your chickens are healthier because they are eating the diverse, living diet their biology was designed for, rather than a processed pellet formulated to approximate it. The mistake was never getting chickens. The mistake was the layout. Fix the layout, and everything the free-ranging was supposed to deliver actually arrives. That is what managed movement does on a small property that free-ranging never could.